I'm going to go ahead with the meeting beginning ritual. 起立，念上佛堂，参加先鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，参加各位的传世一鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。
Chapter 75 says, the people's hunger is due to the excess of their rulers' taxation, so they starve. The people's difficulty in being governed is due to the meddling of their ruler, so they are difficult to govern. The people's disregard for death is due to the glut in their ruler's pursuit of life, so they disregard death. Therefore, those who do not strive for living are better than those who value living. Okay, so my overall commentary is that this chapter, if you read it without commentary, can be rather confusing, and I'll explain why. But first, let's take a look at the structure of this particular chapter, see if we can break it down. So, looking to the Chinese side, and we can do this on the English side as well, but take a look at the Chinese side and looking for repetitions. The first thing that I see is that the first two characters are repeated on line 1, line 4, and line 7. As you can see. So, in the English, the translation for those two characters would be the first two words plus the apostrophe s, the peoples, so you'll see the peoples and the peoples on all of those lines. So, based on that, we are beginning to see a repeating pattern consisting of 3 lines each. So then, when you look at line 2, line 5, and line 8, you should be able to see the repeating patterns there as well. So I'll use a different color, and you can see that the first two characters are from line 2 are the same as the first two characters from line 5, and the same as the first two characters from line 8. Not only that, but looking further down on line 3, we see the same pattern from 3 to 6 to 9. So I'll use yet another color for that, and then I'll line them up. So the hidden pattern now emerges. So you can see that for every section, it's about something about the people, and then the cause of that is the next line, and then the conclusion of that at the end of the third line. So it's that way with section 1, section 2, and section 3. It all starts with something about the people, and then continues on with the cause, and so on. So by now, if you've been following these discussions, then you know that whenever we talk about the ruler and the people, we can always extend that to talk about the self. In other words, your life. So we'll be doing that as well for this particular chapter. The last 2 lines that are not part of these repetitive patterns, the last 2 lines are especially what I pointed out as being difficult to understand, but I will decrypt the last 2 lines along with everyone and make sure that they become crystal clear by the time we're done talking about this chapter. So, let's start out with the first section about hunger, about excessive taxation and starvation. So, what is that all about? So, on one level, you can imagine that this is about the advice from Lao Tzu to the king about ruling, because this seems to be about the people of kingdom starving. So what if we need to map that to your own life with you yourself, the decision maker that is in you, as the ruler, as the king, as the emperor? Well, it's not about you starving physically, but this is about spiritual matters. This is about the starvation of the spirit. This is about your soul feeling hunger for spiritual sustenance. And as we continue on, I think you will see that this makes a whole lot of sense. How do you find spiritual sustenance? So everybody has different solutions. Some people find spiritual sustenance through religion. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's a viable and popular way to find spiritual sustenance. Now, the scientists that I was just talking about, the physicists, people that have worked on the Large Hadron Collider, worked on the theories, worked on the discovery of the Higgs boson, etc., most of the world's scientists, 9 times out of 10, are not religious at all. They are actually very annoyed with the God particle because it implies a connection with religion that they personally don't see, and some of them find that a little bit insulting. So they don't look for spiritual sustenance from the religious experience, 9 times out of 10. The world scientists, they can find it, though, through their own work. That is, they're learning about the cosmos, they're learning about reality, the natural world, they're doing their research, theorizing, experimenting, exploring, finding knowledge, and feeling a sense of awe at the working of the universe, at the beautiful order that seems to pervade the entire reality, top to bottom. So they can find spiritual sustenance through their work that way. This awe at the beautiful way that the world works, that the universe works. What if you are not religious and not a scientist? Well, what then? Well, it depends. Some can find spiritual sustenance, and they try to numb themselves. So what I mean by that is like, when you are a thrill seeker, you are constantly taking on dangerous activities, because that's when you truly feel alive and can glimpse or touch that spark of spirituality that you've been longing for. Some people, instead of thrills, will try to numb themselves through sensory stimulation. And by that, I mean physical pleasures of all kinds. And it may be different for every person. So, needless to say, these solutions, these sources of spiritual sustenance are not necessarily perfect. They don't necessarily last. You may have grown up as a religious person, but then some religious people will grow out of religion. Well, what then? How do you find spiritual sustenance? The people who try to numb themselves with stimulations, with thrills, and perhaps one day they will discover that, well, they're so jaded, it's just not doing it anymore. There's still the emptiness. There's still the need to connect. Well, what happens then? So this chapter is all about that. This chapter is about life. What do you do when you need a connection with spirituality? But let's continue on with these lines. We're only at line 1. So back to the metaphor of the kingdom with the tyrant that is treating people badly, So if we break apart line 2, character by character, we get the following. The first character, because, and then there. Now, the third character usually means up or high. In this case, it means a higher authority in the secular sense, which is the ruler in the material world, the king, the emperor. Because a ruler, and then we have the fourth character just means eat, and then the fifth character means tax, and then there's the apostrophe s, and then there's many or much as the last character. So if we string that together, it sounds kind of funny to say that, oh, the ruler is eating too much tax. Well, but you get the idea. It's saying that the ruler is taxing too much. So a translation, a viable, correct translation would be like the following. It is because the ruler taxes too much. Simple. And you can tell what it says. It's pretty easy. It's saying that, well, if the ruler has this heavy tax on everybody, then people don't have enough for themselves. Of course they're going to starve. Now here's the real question, the question that concerns all of us. We're not an actual king in an actual monarchy. You don't have the duty to levy taxes. You are not living in a kingdom where you're living under a tyrant, hopefully. So how does this map to us in everyday life, where you are the ruler of your own life? So here's the idea. You, in charge of your own life, may tax yourself too much in terms of pursuing material goals, social status, and neglect the spirit. So remember, we're mapping the hunger in line 1 to a kind of spiritual starvation of spiritual sustenance through neglect. So how could that happen? Well, it's because you are overtaxing yourself in terms of material things, material pursuits, things that do not contribute meaningfully to your spirituality, things that do nothing to give your soul the sustenance that it needs. So of course it's going to starve. You are neglecting it. So let's move on. Hence the starvation. For the people, it's a physical starvation, the lack of food. For individuals, it's a starvation of the spirit. So that spiritual starvation or hunger usually manifests as a feeling of emptiness and a lack of meaning, a lack of purpose. It's like a void that eats away at you. Not a comfortable feeling at all. So it's possible to ignore for a while, telling yourself that it's not important, but the certainty in life is that if you do have an emptiness in your life, it's going to come back to haunt you. You're going to feel it. When you are not being distracted by entertainment, when you are alone with your thoughts, it comes back. If there's emptiness, it'll make sure you feel it. So what can you do? Well, as I mentioned in the previous slide, some people find it in religion, some people find it in other pursuits. Some solutions will work temporarily. So let me be a little more specific. So for younger people, oftentimes, they still see the world in black and white, storybook terms. Good versus evil, good vanquishing evil, etc. And they all want to be on the side of good, and they all want to do battle. This is what it means to be young. So the young, being told that you are a soldier for God on a quest to vanquish evil, that can get you all fired up, get you all excited. And you are like pumping your fist, saying, yeah, that's right, I'm a soldier of God. And I say that works temporarily because at some point, people will grow out of it and realize that, well, there's probably more to life, more to what my spirituality needs than to go on some kind of battle, some imaginary war to fight against evil. There's got to be more to that. There's got to be more to life itself. So for the old, it's not about being a soldier marching in God's army. For the old, it's about immersing yourself, with like-minded people, good friends, family, community, fellowship, loved ones, to be surrounded by them. That is going to make life easier. It's going to give life meaning. So a better solution than getting all fired up about enlisting in the war against evil. My commentary about that is, if at all possible, it would be better if everyone can have the Tao in their lives, and I mean everyone, including scientists, including Christians, including people who are religious. If you have the Tao in your life, then you can feel fulfilled with or without loved ones next to you, with or without a lot of human connections. And I think you will also find that people are drawn to you when you possess the Tao within. And that kind of takes care of the last bullet point automatically. So let's talk about the difficulty in being governed. So why and what does it mean to say that the people are difficult to govern? It happens when, as a reaction against the tyrants, people are resistant, disobedient, evasive. They figure out ways to get around the law. They figure out ways to evade detection, evade notice, or monitoring. Now, same question as before. How does this map to the deeper level about the self? What is the difficulty that you will encounter? How does it manifest in your life? So, difficult governance is a way to say the difficulty in managing one's life. So, for the emperor to have difficulty governing the empire is the same as saying you have difficulty governing or running or managing your life. So to say that the subjects in the kingdom are being evasive is a way to say that as you are living your life, trying to manage your life, trying to bring some order into it, you find that it's really difficult. You find that you're not able to establish a regular pattern. You're not able to establish a positive habit for yourself to get your life on the right track. You can't pin them down. Now, in addition to being evasive, people can be resistant or disobedient. So this is a way to say that you can start something good in your life, but then you lose steam. Or initially, you have some success, but as time goes on, somehow you find yourself sabotaging your own success. So in the next line, we want to ask the question, well, why and how? How is it that you can have a life that brings about difficulties like these, where you can't really establish a regular pattern, you can't really find your natural rhythm, and if you start something good, it slips away from you. Why? So I want to talk about these two characters, the last two characters in line 5. So these are 有为, opinion, Yo is written like YOU. This causes a lot of confusion. People will look at that and just say you, but in opinion system, that's the notation for yo. So that's why I say I want to provide a guide for pronunciation. It's yo wei. So what is the significance of these two characters? Yo is the opposite of wu. Yo means to have something, or that you are with something. Wu means to not have, or to be without. So, you wei is the opposite of wu wei. So, if you are a native speaker of modern Mandarin, you might compliment this young fellow by saying, look at him, 年轻有为. That's actually a very nice compliment from you, saying that he's still young and yet he already has accomplishments. So, 有为 in modern Mandarin can be positive, meaning has achievements or accomplishments. Here in this chapter, it is anything but positive. So, in this context from ancient times, it means acting with attachments. That means, as you are going about managing the country, the kingdom, the empire, you can't stop yourself from messing with things, from interfering, from getting your fingers into the pie, into every single pie. So, you are so attached to specific results that you cannot keep yourself from interfering with the process that is taking place. So, why are people difficult to govern? Well, it's because the king can't stop messing with the people. Now, question once again, how do we map that into our lives? So let's take a look at the entire line. So in the metaphor of the kingdom, the ruler keeps messing with people's lives, keeps interfering with their means of livelihood, and therefore causing widespread misery. Okay, that's clear. So no wonder people are difficult to govern, because the king can't leave them alone to live in peace. So that makes a lot of sense. But what about for you and me? What about when we want to live a life that's in accordance with the Tao? So here's the idea. You are unable to let things be, so you get in your own way. And also, the tendency to interfere, the tendency to meddle, is that you get into other people's business. This has the effect of pushing people away from you. So in both instances, in both manifestations, you make things more difficult for yourself. So here's what Lao Tzu would say. Lao Tzu would say that right here, this interference, this getting in your own way, tripping over yourself, this attachment to attachments, this is the number one cause of the problems in your life. So literally, you become your own worst enemy. If you could get yourself to stop being your own worst enemy, well, there's no limiting what you can accomplish. So the trick is to get out of your own way. How do we do that? Let's move on. Let's continue on. So when the king or the emperor is endlessly interfering, so what happens is that the people will be pushed to the limits. The people become resentful of the ruler and therefore rebellious. So they come up with countermeasures. So by countermeasures, that's what I was talking about before when I mentioned resistance, disobedience, evasion. That they figure out ways to be outside the law, to break the law without people knowing. So what about for you and for me? In life, this means a lack of awareness about one's role in making things more difficult for oneself. So even though it's the #1 problem that people have to get in their own way, to trip over themselves, oftentimes they don't realize, they have no idea that is what's happening. And my observation is that most of the time it's due to ego. So it's the reason why someone would have trouble seeing the truth of the situation. Rather than to think of themselves as the source of their problems, the typical tendency is to point away from themselves, to point to other people and say that, no, it wasn't me, they did it to me. My boss is nasty. Wow, I really hate my boss. He's so controlling. Horrible boss, blah, blah, blah. Or, my coworkers, they don't know what they're doing. I have to pick up after them. They're the cause of my problems, blah, blah, blah. Pointing at other people as the cause of your own problems. Okay. So we have already gone through 2 of the sections about the way people are, and using that as a metaphor to comment on the self, comment on the way we live life, manage life. So let's talk about the 3rd one, people's disregard for death. Well, what is that? Well, it sounds kind of familiar from chapter 74. Let's take a look at the breakdown of the character. First character means people. Second character is the apostrophe S. Third character means light, as in weight, lightweight. And then the last character is a character for death or dying. So people's like death, what does that mean? Well, a correct translation would be the people regard death lightly. They don't take it as seriously. Or, if you remember 74, it's basically people losing their fear of death. So it makes a great deal of sense when you understand the previous chapter. In the previous chapter, we talked about how when people are pushed to the limits, when people are no longer fearful of death, when they are in the midst of extreme emotions, the fear of death is not foremost on their minds, then the deterrence of death, the punishment of death, loses the power to prevent people from doing anything. So, same question in this chapter as 74. Now, the ruler has the power to put people to death, but what if people are not afraid of that? They don't care. They don't care, or they would much rather experience the risk of death than to have their future generations be subjected to the tyranny that's oppressing the land. That's the idea. Okay, so here's the most important thing. How do we map this regarding death lightly to spirituality or our practice of the Tao? So what this is saying is that there's a loss of meaning in life, and there's not the same zest of living life as you once had before. The question you ask yourself is, well, why bother? Or what's the point? What's it all for? You probably had, you might have experienced this kind of depressed emotions, or you might have spoken with people who are caught in the depths of depression, and that's the kind of thing they will say. What's the point? Why go on? Why bother? if life is a ride, then I want to get off. That type of idea. Okay, so what do we do about that? And what is the cause of it? What causes people to regard death lightly? Let's take a look. So in line 8, the idea is that when people see the extravagant life of the ruler compared against their own misery, they rise up in anger to overthrow the ruler. So the disregard for death is due to the glut in the ruler's pursuit of life. So the ruler is living well, enjoying the good life. The people are certainly not. The people are miserable. So that's the cause for anger. That's the cause of resistance, of rising up against the ruler. What about you? So first of all, when you overindulge in anything, any aspect of life, the short-term enjoyment, like the king living well, creates long-term problems, like the people taking up arms against the ruler. So the simplest example that I always use is the buffet table. So when you are hungry and you want to feed your face, you show up at the buffet, and that in the short term lets you satisfy the desire to consume. But what happens is that you get stuffed. You end up having way too much. So later on, after gorging yourself, you suffer a lot of discomfort. So in general, whenever you are over the top with anything, there's usually a negative consequence that follows. So as I will point out in the next slide, the buffet table is only one example out of many. Let's take a look. So let's extend the idea. Anytime you go overboard with your material pursuits in any aspect of life, no matter what it is, it will ultimately lead to the erosion of your joy. So I think you can begin to sense an irony here because, well, I wanted to enjoy life, and that's why I attack the buffet table. I wanted to enjoy eating. But ironically, what I end up doing, feeling so stuffed, so uncomfortable, is that I created the opposite of joy for myself. I created the misery for myself. Now, if I understood moderation and I consumed just what I needed, after my meal, I may actually feel pretty good. I feel full, I feel energetic. I had a great meal, it was tasty, it was nutritious, it was good for me. I feel good. So that's the overall idea in this chapter, is that there's a certain way to do this thing called life properly, and many people do it wrong. So as I said, the buffet is only one example out of many. What are some other examples? So a very common example, probably one that you have seen many times, as well as I have, is that the aggressive, single-minded pursuit of money or status leads to neglect of one's family. And in place of one's family, you can think of, the significant other, your most important relationships, your most important friends. When you are so aggressive and single-minded, chasing after money, making money, or raising up your status, social status, you may forget about the truly important things in life, and that's family comes first. The people who are important to you, the people who are the foundation of your existence, your most important friends, your loved ones. So that's very common. And I also have a personal example that I want to share with you, a friend of mine. So when I was younger, had this good friend. we became close friends, and this guy was the envy of all of my male friends because he was good looking, he was funny, he was sociable, popular with the ladies, he loved the ladies loved him. So among all of us guys, all of us young guys, he was the one who had no trouble whatsoever with dating. So we would all look on in envy as he goes on one date after another. And it's so easy for him. And we all could never imagine, having that kind of luck with the ladies ourselves. So we became close friends, and we got to talk about some of these bigger, deeper issues in life. Then I discovered from him that it's not exactly the way that it looks to everybody. It's not exactly the way that it looked to me at first. I thought, wow, Casanova, ladies man, doing so well, I only wish I could have like 1/10 of that. But hearing him talk about it, it's not that at all. He's had so many shallow relationships that they never actually fulfill a deeper need that he had. He says, yeah, I'll go on these dates, it's true. I'll have fun, it's true. But when the date is over and done with, I come back to my apartment and I'm all by myself. So there's a scene from a recent movie. I talked about this movie before. It's Lego Batman. So basically, in that movie, Batman does all these cool things, defeats criminals, supervillains, saves the city. Everybody loves Batman. Everybody's like, taking pictures of Batman, and he's like, oh, thank you. And, oh, no, oh, hey, thanks. And then he's going to the orphanage. He's giving everybody presents. People love him. And then he drives off, and he's laughing. Ha, 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 that was a good day. And then he comes back to the Batcave, right? So the Batcave is big and empty, and he comes into the Batcave, and he's like, computer, I'm home. And all there is in response is his echo. I'm home, I'm home, I'm home. Because there's nobody. There's nobody else in his life. So at the end of all that fun, battling bad guys, fighting against evil, enjoying the public adulation, he comes back to the Batcave, his home base, and he is all alone, all by himself. Nobody to talk to, nobody to understand him. And in fact, the whole movie, Lego Batman, is about that. It's about him finally coming out of his shell of self-imposed isolation. So here, what I want to draw from that example is that this guy, this friend of mine, is like the Batman of dating. He's had a tremendous degree of success. And he overindulges in that success, but he's not really feeding any spiritual needs that he had, so he comes home really empty, really lonely, and was actually miserable. And I thought, gee, me and the other guys, we all thought that this would be the happiest dude out there with he's constantly walking around with a big smile. We figured that must be why. We did not realize how lonely and sad he really was. So drawing from that lesson, my purpose in life then became not to try to figure out how to have a whole lot of shallow relationships, but to have one deep, meaningful relationship in my life, one that feeds the spirit, one that sustains me, one that does not neglect the soul. So that's what the Tao is about. Okay, here we are at the last two lines. And this is what I mentioned before as being difficult to understand. So let's start. Let's start with line 10. Line 10 says, therefore, those who do not strive for living, that right away can be the basis of confusion. Because strive for living, these three words in this context means the obsessive pursuit of luxuries in life. And that's a negative pattern from the sage's perspective. So he's using, Lao Tzu is using the king or the emperor as an example, that if you pursue luxuries in life obsessively at the expense of the people through taxing them too much to enrich the royal coffers, then you're going to end up with a negative outcome. You're going to have a bad ending. So it's important to understand that strive for living here is entirely negative. So I say that this can seem like an alien concept. Why? Because in the West, we often associate striving as a positive thing. So the striver, we talk about that as the achiever, someone who can accomplish, someone who works hard. To strive means to work hard against adversity, to have discipline that eventually leads to success. So when commenting on Asian Americans, as an example, in this society, people will sometimes try to compliment them by saying that, well, you know, they work really hard, they strive for success. So bottom line is that in our world, this is a positive thing. But in the Tao Te Ching, strive means trying to do too much. And when you try to do too much, you've gone past the point of equilibrium or balance, and you start getting bad results. We see that in our world too, that by working too hard, there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of issues. You develop problems with your health from working too hard, etc. Now, let's tackle the other point of confusion, possible confusion. The last two characters, 贵生. So 贵, the first character, it means to value. It can also mean expensive. And then 生, that means life or living. So literally, the two characters are value and life. So translation, value living. So both line 10 and line 11 can be difficult to understand because, you know, when you talk about value living, value life, in the West, we tend to think of that as a good thing. Yeah, I value life. We all value life. That's a good thing, isn't it? So what exactly is Lao Tzu trying to say? Better than those who value life? What? That doesn't make any sense. Well, let's decrypt that together. Value living, in this case, has a very specific meaning, and it makes sense in conjunction with the lines that you have already read in this chapter. It's pointing to the ruling elites who value their own lives and live excessively. Live excessively at the expense of the people. Okay, so using everything in this slide and the previous slide as our clue, we can now simplify the last two lines to make it easier to understand. And it says, those who do not live excessively are better off than those who do. Well, now that's a lot easier to understand because those who live excessively are out of balance. So if you don't do that, you're going to be a lot better off than if you are out of balance. And we are now finally ready to talk about the last line with those misconceptions out of the way. So this is an instance where the original language is a little bit different from modern Mandarin, and it can be even a little bit difficult to understand from the Western perspective because it presents ideas that are from Eastern thought 2,500 years ago. Okay, so when we talk about how those who do not live excessively are better off than those who do live excessively, we can say it in a different way to hopefully make it easier to understand. Those who are wise enough to do just the right amount in life, not too much, not too little, end up much better off. Those who have balance. So oftentimes, in churches all across the land, every Sunday, people talk about you got to treat people well, you got to be charitable, you have to give, you have to do good deeds, etc. Here's Lao Tzu saying that, well, even those activities can be carried to an excess. You can be too giving to other people. You can be so giving that, and you don't even realize that the recipient is not noticing or appreciating everything that you do for them. They take you for granted. Parents all know how this feels. Parents get taken for granted all the time. They take you for granted. They don't appreciate it. They lash out against you, and you're like, but I was only trying to help. Well, this is an instance. This happens all the time, and it's the reason why Lao Tzu will point to that and say that, well, that's actually going overboard. If you have done less of the giving, the compassionate giving, you would actually end up with a better result. That when you do actually give appropriately, people will be like, oh my goodness, I can't believe what you are doing for me. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So this reminds me of the story that Tao masters often tell about this kid who argues with his parents, and he's so mad. The little kid is so mad, he decides to run away from home. So when parents are not noticing, that's it. He's gone, and he goes out. He just wants to get as far away from home as possible. So he's wandering around the streets, not sure exactly where to go, thinking about visiting his friends, hang out with his friends. Yeah, his friends are cool, right? But then his friends are all with their own families, and if he was to show up at their friend's house, the friend's parents will contact the kid's parents, saying that, hey, did you know that your son is here? I want me to send him home. He'd be caught. So okay, no hang out with friends. So he's wandering the streets, not knowing where to go. He's getting cold. He's getting hungry. He doesn't know. He's a little bit lost. He's not sure what his next step ought to be. At that point, there's a vendor. There's a street vendor that's selling noodle soup. Noticing the little kid looking miserable and hungry, waves him over. Come on over here, little kid. I got some hot noodle soup that this is for you. You must be really hungry. Go ahead and have this. So as the kid is taking in this hot soup, it's chasing away the chill that he was feeling. He's not so cold anymore, and it's feeding the hunger that he had. He is filled with gratitude, so much so that tears started rolling down. He's like, nobody is ever so good to me before. Oh my goodness, wow. Okay, so then the vendor says, well, okay, I can probably figure out what you're trying to do, but this is not a good idea. You should just go home. It's going to be dark pretty soon. Where are you going to go, right? So the kid is like, okay, yeah, that was probably foolish of me to try to run away from home. So he goes home, and his parents are worried. They couldn't find him. They had no idea where he was. They asked him, where'd you go? What happened? So he told them, and he said, yeah, I went over here, I went over there. I was wandering the streets. I didn't know what to do. And then this elderly uncle was so kind to me. He gave me noodle soup and told me to come back home. And his parents are like, but we cook for you every day. So you don't have 1/10 the gratitude for us cooking for you every single day, but you have this unbelievable amount of gratitude for someone who gave you a noodle soup. So we forget about that. We don't think about that. So balance is the idea. The neglecting of one's family is another main topic in the Tao. So remember, doing too much, doing too little, those are not good ideas. You end up not achieving the positive results that you were looking for. Just like the parents of that little kid. Okay, now, there's also the right balance of having a plan and being spontaneous. So this is important. Sometimes people assume that cultivating the Tao means going with the flow. Okay, well, I don't really have a plan. I'll just go wherever the Tao sends me, is what they say. That's actually not the proper mindset for Tao cultivation. The proper mindset is one of balance, which means you are willing to be spontaneous, given and give yourself to the moment, live in the moment, but at the same time, you also have a plan. So you are not so fixated on your plan that you have to follow it step by step. You are just obsessed with completing all the steps in your plan. That would not be the Tao. That would be an extreme. But have some kind of plan, but also being able to spontaneously go with the moment, to improvise. That is the hallmark of a Tao cultivator. You end up with the balance, you end up with consistently good results and no stress. Now, I underline no stress here because I wanted to apply the idea of balance to that expression, no stress. Because even when it comes to stress, Tao cultivators look for balance. That is, you are not completely stressed out, and you are also not completely without stress. What do I mean by that? Well, a Tao cultivator would tell you that the only time when you are completely without stress is when you are asleep or dead. That in life, a certain amount of stress is useful. A certain amount of stress is the catalyst for action. Sometimes you do your best work when you are being stressed. So you want to have just enough stress, but not too much. So even stress, when I say with no stress, I think you know what I mean. I mean without the stress that gives you a heart attack, gives you a stroke, or gives you, worsening health. I don't mean no stress at all, as if you were in a coma. So here's the final thing. People who can follow this particular Tao, they actually enjoy life a lot more than the people who value life so much, like nobles, the rulers, the ruling elites, the emperor. They value life so much, they basically kill themselves trying to get more out of life. Like, I love life. I have to eat everything at the buffet table. Bad idea. If you are wise, maintain the right balance, you end up enjoying life a whole lot more. So here in this chapter, using these metaphors, we've actually learned what Lao Tzu thinks is the best way to live life. And I would say it's very good advice. So what are some key ideas that we can take away from this chapter? I've got 3 that I can suggest for everyone. Number 1, don't forget to feed the spirit. Don't neglect the spirit. What is the spiritual sustenance your soul requires? Is it the Tao? Is it something else? Whatever it is, you want to not forget to feed the spirit or the soul. You remember to feed the cat, the dog, the bird, the fish. Don't forget to feed your inner self. Number 2, instead of butting into someone's business, focus on your own cultivation. This goes to meddling and interference. So the ruler that interferes ends up with a very upset population, very upset populace. If you interfere with other people, you end up with alienated friends, people who maintain their distance. They don't want to get near you. But if you focus on your own cultivation and you get yourself on the right path, the results will become obvious to all, and they start coming to you without you having to go to them. You don't need to butt into their business. They will come ask you for your thoughts. That's number 2. Number 3, look for the right balance between the methodical and the freewheeling. Both are aspects of the Tao. To be methodical, to plan things out, to have an idea of what you're getting into, that's important. But you are not obsessively tied to it. You are also able to be freewheeling, to improvise, to be in the moment. So that is the way to practice moderation, to have balance in your life. So it is once again the best policy.
Let's go ahead and do the meeting ending ritual, everybody. 起立，面向佛堂，持架3鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，3鞠躬，持架规则是1鞠躬，接班1鞠躬。Okay, everybody, we are done.